As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which VetNexus stands, the Turrbal and the Yagara peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to the traditional custodians of the land that you're listening from today. Welcome to the Skills Forecast, in conversation with me, Kerry Buttery. Each episode, I sit down with one guest for one genuine conversation about the forces reshaping work, learning, and capability in Australia and beyond. This is a real conversation, recorded live, brought to you here as a podcast. Let's get into it. So, thank you so much. It's great to have so many people joining us for this session. This is the Skills Forecast. It is our very first session. I'm Kerry Buttery, founder of VetNexus, and it's a new live interview series where each month I'm going to sit down with a guest for one conversation about forces reshaping work, learning, and capability in Australia and internationally. So today's episode 1. Can't honestly think of a better topic to open with than the one that everybody is talking about right now, and that is AI and the noise and everything that's happening with AI. We've got things coming from everywhere, every direction. We're just getting smashed with information about AI. Someone that I have been talking to this topic about for a very long time and have even presented conference sessions with is Toby Jones. Toby's the founder of Noello. He's really focused today on, in all of his work, on AI in the workplace, AI in education. And he's got some really practical ideas on how AI can really work in well with us in education and in business. And he's working at the coalface of what AI really means and actually means for our providers. He's working on implementing things. He's looking at what else is happening, and he's built some really amazing tools. So I'm really happy to welcome Toby as our first guest to the Skills Forecast. Hi, Toby.
Erin, thank you very much. And again, amazing that we've had so many people joining for this first conversation. So I feel very privileged to be your first guest. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the work that you're currently doing in that space of AI, just so everyone can get a bit of an understanding of what your day-to-day looks like?
Yeah, great. So at Noello, we really started out doing AI adoption in its very much entry-level form of where do we start? What's going on in the organization? How do we write a policy? What maybe is the first tool that we might implement? And so we've been on that journey of kind of consulting, training, teaching. Then during that journey, we've identified a number of themes that have come up, particularly things like AI governance and shadow AI. And so started to actually build internal capability, so hiring developers and actually starting to build products which we feel currently there isn't a fit for. And often that is actually products that are only available from Europe or the US or wherever else. And we don't actually have a sovereign version of it. And so when, particularly in education, data sovereignty is so important, we've been sort of starting to, in some of the products that we're building in that governance space, ensuring that they are onshore.
That is a really important point that you've just raised, and things that have been happening with recent announcements with the government, etc., that we will jump into as we move along. And that is that sovereignty. And at the moment, we're relying on all these overseas organizations for what we need. Now, what we're going to be talking about today are things like job cuts, people going, we're losing all these jobs because of AI, but this is actually a lot more complicated than that. And so let's delve into what it is that we actually need to be focused on. So you've spent 15 plus years working across the UK and Australia. When you look at what AI is actually doing in the workforce right now, what are you actually seeing happening?
I think I'm seeing two trends at the moment. One is super positive. One is, I think we've stopped, or certainly stopped more than we were, this sort of AI witch hunt of calling people out because, oh, I bet you wrote that using AI, or I bet you used AI to do that. And to the shift of actually some organizations I speak to now are actually criticizing team members for not using AI. Why did you spend an hour nursing over that report where you could have used the tools that we have available and actually buy yourself some efficiencies? And I think that's been really positive. And there was a few years ago and chatting to a high school teacher who had found a really good prompt that spent ages building, and to be able to change a lesson plan into the different voices required based on the different requirements of students within the room. And I said, that's amazing. Have you told all your colleagues? He said, oh no, because then they would say that it's not my work and I'd be almost sort of, degraded in my capability. So I'm really pleased that we've moved beyond that now. And actually people are just being a lot more open around how they're using AI rather than using it in the shadows. I think the flip side of that, and maybe the negative side of that, is we're talking about, job losses and things later on, but this paranoia of, how am I going to get replaced by an AI tool? I feel like in some scenarios, we're actually already giving our choice and our voice up to the AI tool, because what I see now happening is the over-reliance where somebody sends somebody an AI generated email and somebody uses their AI tool of choice to write the response and send it back. And there's no human checks. So what we're really doing as humans is we're becoming the people that pass messages between two different AI tools. And so I do have a level of concern that it's great now that we're talking about it, but the human component, the human element, the expert, the human in the loop has to be there, or we'll find ourselves becoming irrelevant because we're just allowing AI to speak to other AI and take away all of our kind of decision-making, innovation and creativity. So two sides I think I'm seeing.
Yeah, I suppose it depends how far we go into it as to how that is going to impact jobs. Some industries are going to be impacted more than others. So let's talk about the job loss question. In the first 10 weeks of 2026, Australian companies chopped almost 4,500 tech jobs and corporate jobs and blamed that on AI. So banks and some of our big tech companies. A University of Sydney analysis argued that many companies are using AI as a convenient label just to cut back on staff. Because obviously we've got cost of living crisis, record number of small businesses closing down at the moment as well. So what do you think? Do you think AI is actually taking all of these jobs, or do you think it might be being used as a bit of a scapegoat for some things?
Yes, it's an interesting one, and it's a bit of a controversial so I'm pleased we're starting with controversy so early on in the conversation. And there is someone much more better informed than I, who I follow on TikTok called Nate. I think his handle is like Nate AI, Nate, and he's ex-Googler. And he talks about how job cuts in particularly the big kind of frontier companies, the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons, have really been done based on shareholder value. And actually, in order to justify or to rebalance the balance sheet, where we are spending billions and billions and billions, numbers that we've never even thought about or comprehended before, on some of these AI tool developments, data centers, energy, whatever it may be, to counterbalance that, they're making cuts to their workforce to please shareholders and basically free up cash flow. So it's not that they've all of a sudden built the capability that they can have 10,000 agents that are running over doing the work that others previously have done on the human side of things. So I think there is a bit of a miscommunication. AI, yes, is the cause of that, but it's not the cause of that because it's replacing them. The cause of that because of how they're spending their funds. I think the interesting other side of it, which again, you're getting a number of, I think there's been 5 kind of well-documented articles in the last year of where organizations have made cuts and then have actually reverted back again because they've realized that actually they've tried to use AI as this cost-cutting activity and they've actually created more problems for themselves. I think there was a fintech company, I can never pronounce it, Klarna, Klarna. Klarna cut 700 of their customer service people, and they've hired them all back, or tried to anyway. I hope demanded double, but they've hired them all back. I think Combank had the same thing. They let go about 70 people who had been, not great circumstances. They've been training a tool that then the tool replaced them, a chatbot. So both of these scenarios were, I guess, getting carried away in thinking that the technology was at a human level. In almost in the same way that when people started having the traditional chatbots on their website to mean that less people were going to call up to find out about their flight details, it's kind of it's the same, but the next augmentation. Like there's the other week where I got hit one of these chatbots and it wasn't AI enabled, it was just a keyword matching. I wanted to find out if my luggage was going to be transferred once I got to a particular airport. Clearly that wasn't in the programming. So it was trying to ask me about baggage allowance and did I want to add another bag or whatever else. So there was always these terrible experiences with chatbots. They got
Mm-hmm.
better with the AI-enabled natural language piece. But I do think people have got carried away and thinking now that we do have pretty sophisticated voice agents, that they're going to be able to deal with the nuances of how we communicate. I think one of the things I read was around sarcasm and people using sarcasm to say like, oh, of course, I'm delighted about the fact that I've now got these new banking fees or whatever else. And the bot didn't know how to read sarcasm. So it would say, well, that's great. You're so pleased, and here's, have another 5%. And so these nuances that, again, we only learn when the tools are put out there. But I think in some instances, particularly in these sort of, let's just cut people and bring in these tools, is very short-sighted. And I think a much better approach is actually adding another tier. So yes, if you want level 1 service inquiries or whatever it may be to be dealt with by an AI voice chatbot of some sort, great. But keep the 70 people and elevate them to being now the second tier. So when the chatbot can't do it, there's more time and there's actually people are waiting less time on the phone because they can actually speak to somebody about a nuanced example. And so your actual customer care will improve significantly. But just saying we're going to get rid of people or bring in the machines, I think is very troubling and short-sighted.
Yeah, and I think that example is really good because it highlights that customer service. Something that could be really good with an AI chatbot is that it's going to reduce wait times. So you don't have to wait for 45 minutes to an hour on hold before you can actually talk to someone. If you've got a really simple question, like, where's my baggage? Here's the number, and you can get something automated back. It means that for some people, it can be solved really quickly. And then if it's not something that can be solved quickly, as long as they've got that exit point to be able to be escalated to a human, you're not going to have to wait as long because they've still got the 70 people there. And then they can get on and talk, and then you get happier customers.
Yeah.
What do you think, going into that as well, how do you think trust is impacted? So if company, let's say it's one of the banks, and you come on and all you're getting is a chatbot and you can't actually get transferred to a human, what does that do to the trust of the person that's interacting with?
Completely erodes the trust. I think the worst scenarios of that is when organizations have not been upfront about the fact that they are using an AI tool. And then they've landed themselves in hot water because it's made an AI related mistake. It's hallucinated. It's said something that no human would ever say or respond to, whatever it may be. I think there's a place for being super upfront in the way that we're saying at the beginning about people are calling it out a bit more now and being a bit more okay with it, in that you can give people options. You could say, you can call this number and speak to a human and you might wait an hour, or you can call this number and it'll be an AI chatbot. And if it's an FAQ style question, you'll get a response in 2 seconds. Rather than sort of funneling everyone towards this, oh, it's as good as phoning a human, and it's not. And so I think we're still figuring that out at the moment about what that looks like. And I think this is true in a number of areas where it's okay. And it's definitely where we should be going, is using these tools to do some of these lower level components, but we have to be transparent about it.
And that is one of the principles around AI use, is transparency.
Yeah.
And I guess if someone's ringing up, they need to know that they're talking to an AI bot, because for that to be happening, their voice is being recorded, or, something's happening with what they're inputting into that system. So they have to be able to give their permission for that.
Interestingly, you mentioned that. So I'm doing a bit of research at the moment on the effects of AI and robotics on the hospitality sector and looking at how new skills might appear. And one of the new skills that might have to be considered if this goes beyond being a fad to being a way of working is humans knowing how to talk to AI voices. So, because in a world where we all have an AI voice assistant and I say, go and book me a restaurant for tonight, and it phones the restaurant, you need to be able to actually answer that call and maybe change your tone or the way you structure your question to mean that you can get the right result. So there's some interesting, I know we're kind of getting away from getting, but from the skill perspective, it's interesting to see if we're going to start having you have to allow for the fact that it might be not just us calling something and speaking to an AI, but actually an AI calling us and how we then actually interact with it.
That just makes me think of when you're doing your phone banking or you're doing something that's voice recognition and you're saying the same thing and it goes, you say apple, it goes, did you say orange? And you're there yelling at it going, apple, apple. And it's not quite getting you the way that we speak and the clarity and something there that would come into it would be different accents and these AI tools being able to interpret all the different accents that people have.
Yeah, that's a huge, and that's almost an excuse for why people would potentially, if English was a second language, why they might use one of these tools to mean that they can actually verify that they have communicated what it was they wanted to communicate effectively. I mean, certainly for me, like, I'm really dyslexic. And so for me, being able to I use whisper flow to dictate everything.
Mm.
And knowing that I'm actually saying the right thing is so important. Whereas, previously I had a scenario where I told someone that I would defiantly be there because in my head it said the word definitely, and you put it into a spell check and it says the word's fine. So how do you know? I said, I'll defiantly be there. And the person called me up and said, so does that mean you want to be there or not? And so the good thing now is that, yeah, those sorts of little ticks where the technology is there to support it, but actually you can still get it wrong. It's been an absolute game changer. And I think the same is true for English as a second language, accent, people with heavy accents, certainly.
Yeah, Cherie's put that into the chat, language differences to allow for slang, vocal afflictions, accents, etc. But I suppose a flip side of that is having some of these tools, you might be able to say Spanish and it might then be able to speak to you in a different language so that you can actually communicate in your native language.
Well, we're kind of there at the beginning, aren't we, with the meta glasses, the live translation tools. I don't know if you tried the ones I think Zoom and Teams have got live translators that they've either brought out or are bringing out. I don't know if you've tried those, but certainly the meta glasses are very much at the beginning of that. There's all sorts of problems where if you're in a noisy shop or a market or something, it doesn't really know what it's doing. But the idea being that your glasses have got you're able to have got audible in them as well. So you're able to hear, and you and I could be having a conversation. The idea being it'll pick up what I'm saying in English and you speaking back to me in Spanish, and in my ears, I'll be hearing English. And so we're starting to get there. That will be something, but I think the technology is not really there yet.
Quite there yet. I am going to jump to one of the questions. So we've got two questions there, and I'm actually going to go to one of them. I'll come back to one. When we teach students in person and we understand that English is their second language and they have difficulty speaking English, but when they submit their assessments, instead of taking help with AI, they make AI do their complete assessments for them. So frustrating. So how should we, and our next couple of questions, we're going to actually delve into the education side, but do you have any comments around how we might be able to approach that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. There's actually a part of a workshop I'm doing tomorrow is looking at it from the other way, which is how can we build a writing agent for trainers to use where if English is a second language, they can actually take a piece of text they've written, a RTO bulletin, put it into the tool, and they can quickly create two versions. A version that's going to go to, sort of 90% and then a version that's going to go out that is written more in line with assisting people who English isn't their first language. How you do it the other way around, though, I don't know. I'd take that on notice. I'm trying to think. What's your thoughts on that, Kerry? How would you? There's obviously a transparency piece in there of,
There's a few things that we need to be doing in terms of education. And one of those is actually educating our students around how to use AI, not banning it, but actually say, okay, well, we're going to use AI to explore this topic and actually go on that journey with them. And there's frameworks out there. One of my favorite frameworks that Leon Fers has worked on, the AI assessment scale. It then gives students guidance on what they can use AI for within their assessments. So rather than just saying, you have to do this yourself and, I can tell you didn't write that. It's okay, well, we're going to use AI in our training, and we're going to use it in our assessment in different ways. And this is what you can use it for, this is what you can't use it for. And that way you then get to see what the student can actually do and look at the process of their learning rather than just the product of something that is written and handed in. So having a look at, okay, well, this is your thought process, this is how you got there. Because one of the most important things as we move through this conversation is critical thinking. Like you mentioned before, the human aspect. What about the human side is it that we need to be maintaining and developing? And one of those things is that critical thinking around how we can use AI for different things and when it's appropriate to use, when it's not appropriate to use, and then looking at the information that's actually giving us and go, yeah, that's spot on, or no, that's not appropriate for what I need.
They're like a show your workings opportunity in the same way that, I think back to,
Maths.
high school maths, and you couldn't just write the answer.
Yeah.
And because I know that, Ethan Mullick, who we've spoken about before and recommend to anyone if you're looking for sort of plain English insights into what's going on in the space. But he talks about this idea of reframing, and obviously he's in the university space, but reframing some of their assignments in that everyone has to use AI for them. And then you come into the classroom and you discuss whether you agree with the AI output and what the process was what were the prompts that you used to get to that point. It becomes more around sort of learning through experimentation with the tool. And you still have to have that knowledge yourself to be able to be critical as to whether the output is accurate or not. Yeah, could there be something in that where you show your workings? Like how does that translate into sort of competency-based?
The way that I've been recommending people look at it is when they structure their assessments, there would be components. So we need to get away from 50 short answer questions or however many. Short answer questions are really just saying, can a student go and find information from that place and put it in that place? And now with AI, it's can students copy and paste a prompt and copy and paste the answer to it? We need to get away from the short answer questions and really start to then look at more project based. And that can be across all different industry areas. And we can have a look at, okay, well, here's stage one. We're going to make some inquiry around this particular topic. We might be talking, so let's go certificate 2 level financial systems when we're going to learn about the money market in Australia and how that works. So let's go and use AI to do some research on that and look at the sources. And then we're going to pick out, the parts that we already know about and then take out some other parts that we need to delve further into and start asking questions about that. Okay, from that, I'm going to then start to work on a financial plan and take that through. So actually using AI to do research for us, evaluate the research, provide copies of your prompt, your transcript, and then an analysis of the information that you've been provided. Did it use good sources of information? So go and have a look at the sources that it's used. Which ones would you actually rely on? Which ones would you disregard? What's the value? What's the quality of the information that you've been given? And then actually go through and use that to create your financial plan or whatever it is that you need to do. Really embed using AI throughout that assessment process. And that can apply in so many different settings. It's just thinking about our assessment a little bit differently. And like you mentioned, that conversation, so at Viva, a competency conversation at the end, you come in and you hand in, okay, well, this is all my research. This is my portfolio of what I've put together. I can tell my internet's playing up a little bit. This is everything that I've produced. And then the trainer or the teacher will go, okay, well, let me ask you a few questions about that. And just a 5-minute conversation to run through to make sure that the student has actually understood what it is that they've been investigating and talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I think this also sort of aligns with a question that I know you asked me prior to today around how do we measure this? And is this going to be another digital literacy marker there's just yet another thing that we have to measure? And I think from what you're saying there, and certainly I think my take on this is that at the moment, this is a standalone discipline, subject, whatever you want to call it, skill. But in the same way that we don't do internet studies it's just woven into the fabric of how we actually do research or write something or send something. The same is true with this. I think the only way that the natural way this will continue is that AI is just woven and it become, I was going to be brave enough to say it might become part of STEM, but STEM's your area, not my area. I wouldn't like to say, but my feeling is that it just, and how philosophical you want to get into it of like what point in time students are exposed to it. But there's an argument to say that it becomes the next thing on from handwriting and communication and basic arithmetic is how you actually start to engage with these tools that are woven into all subjects for all ages, rather than it being this thing that we try and measure. And I completely understand why it is like that at the moment, because it is this sort of newish thing coming over the horizon. But I think the only way of actually starting to do this is not starting to wrap around another digital literacy type label and we're going to assess against it or we're going to try and monitor and all the rest of it. Is it has to be woven throughout everything that we're doing. And like you said there, I think that's exactly how that then operates from a reframing of assessment.
Mm, yeah, and that is a really good point around the label of it. It actually fits inside digital literacy. So if we were to look at DigComp 3.0, which is our latest framework around digital literacy, AI literacy has been woven through that whole framework because it impacts all different parts of digital literacy. And it is becoming just as important as reading, writing, oral communication, numeracy, etc. It's becoming one of our new skills that we have to have just to participate in the workforce. And that's one of my questions to you around skills. There's a lot of talk about AI skills. We see job advertisements talking about AI skills. If we delve down to what a young person, or doesn't have to be a young person, someone going into the workforce who is looking for a job, might be changing jobs, what do they need to know and be able to do in 2026 or 2027 to be genuinely employable in an AI-influenced workforce? So not an AI specialist, not someone working in technology as such, but someone who is in an AI-influenced workforce.
I've thought about this a lot, and I think one of the biggest divides, I guess, is to what you sort of corrected yourself on there of saying, a young person versus someone looking for a job. I think there is a difference. So if you are newer in your career, I honestly do think this is harder because you don't actually necessarily know what are the workflows, what is an average day in the office, what does that actually look like? If you've had some experience, I've started to see it through speaking to others and through a little bit the interviewing that we've been doing around new team members, is people with more experience are coming to those interview conversations saying, this is how I would use AI to do my job, because they understand the job. They understand, say it's marketing is always an easy one for people to sort of be able to think about, but this is how I would improve this workflow or do my research or write my post. And so being able to give examples of how they've thought about those critical tasks that make up their role and thought about how they would be enhanced through using AI tools and have experimented with different tools. I think it's really hard to do that if you're just entering the workforce where you don't have that work experience piece to understand actually, how do I use these tools to benefit what I'm doing? And how do I measure the impact of this tool versus what a non-AI enabled version of this workflow maybe look like?
And we've just had a comment from Kalia saying, very concerned that the employability gap will grow, because like what you're saying there is we're going to have, so you've got to be experienced to know what you're doing in a particular role. So let's go accounting. That's one of my background areas, accounting. And in accounting, we've got people who have been working in that space for a very long time, and they know what it is that they need to get done. They know what has to be done as part of that job, and they can look at an output and go, that's not right. Or, yep, that looks what I would expect it to look like. If we've got someone who is new, who doesn't have that level of experience, how do they work their way up the chain? How do they get that experience?
Mm. It's really hard. And I was leaning on this sort of hospitality research I've been doing recently, and that came up massively was nobody starts in the kitchen as a chef.
Mm,
Generally speaking, people start, entry level as weekend pot wash, and then you might be allowed to peel the potatoes, and then you join the line, and then you work your way through those different divisions. But if we are now looking at, certainly in the hospitality space, bringing robotics in to start doing some of those repetitive tasks like chopping, washing, cooking, then we have these kind of chef orchestrators that sit over the top and will manage a robotic line. How do you get people back up to that level? How do you get to the level of being a chef? And I don't think it's something we've really understood yet, or really know how to do it. And whether it's going to be that we're going to have to see more sort of training, workplace facing colleges where actually, use the hospitality example. There is I know some TAFEs and some privates have this where they actually have a restaurant as part of their organization, or students go and work in the cafe or whatever it may be. So they have that job placement exposure. But where that falls in other industries, I'm not entirely sure. Or whether it is that as employers are going to have a certain percentage or a certain intake of students or newly qualified people who are actually able to go through the ranks and learn those skills. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a position where in the next 15 years, maybe less, where we have an aging workforce of expertise and
mhm.
nobody coming through to be able to fulfill it. And my fear is that then means that if you're coming through and you haven't had all that experience, your only option is to agree with the AI output.
Yes. And you don't know what you're agreeing
And
with.
you don't know what you're agreeing to. And that's where at the moment, if you've had experience in an industry, you are able to say that doesn't look right, or that wouldn't happen in reality, or think about that again, or reframe it. If you don't have that lived experience, how are you going to be able to make those kind of judgment calls?
And that then brings us back full circle to job losses to AI. We need to be really careful about how we are using AI, that we're not just replacing entry level jobs. Yes, we would replace the tasks that are repetitive, that, coming onto a call center and saying basic things that could get triaged through quite quickly. And then the actual ones that need to talk to a person, get to a person, but don't get rid of the person, because we still need to have that process of communication, of traineeship or apprenticeship. So, and it might mean that apprenticeship models become even more important than they were or are at the moment. When we go back to how we used to have that, everyone had the mentor going through in the workplace. You did your training, but then you also then had your person who made sure that you were picking things up in the workplace, not just getting a job and doing the job.
There's also, I mean, without getting too sort of philosophical about it, but there's also in some of these scenarios where you are doing a direct swap between a human answering the phone and an AI answering the phone, of almost saying, well, this is as good as it's ever going to get. It's always been humans that have pushed to the next level and gone, how can we improve customer service just 5% more, a little bit more? Or how can we change up what we're going to do? But if we're bringing repetitive systems to, and losing the humans, what's the chance of that service line actually going up? Or are we just saying this is the best it's ever going to be? And so we will just automate around that. Whereas if you have people with expertise sitting over the top, you might
Mm,
unlock with time, as time is always the biggest constraint in all these things, is people being
yes.
able to think about how could we actually improve this process or this experience of a customer or a student or a colleague or whatever it may be.
So thinking about the things that we've talked about so far, I feel that organizations, instead of going, we're going to get rid of these 10 jobs and AI is going to do that. It should be AI is improving our efficiency, but we're going to keep our people. Maybe they get rid of one person, but keep our people so that we can get them doing some of the things that we never get to, rather than just about cutting costs. But like you've just said, how do we make it that 5% or 10% better and improve, and look at the other places that we can invest the human side, rather than just going, oh, we don't need that task anymore, and blocking out tasks.
There's an activity we've done a number of times now at different organizations where we just talk about, we say, we're not going to talk about technology. We're just going to talk about where we're human in our work. And that's all we're going to do. We're just going to talk about where are we most human? What are the human components? And often it's actually, these are the reasons why we decided to go into that career, particularly in vocational, why we decided to go into that career in the first place. And so we create a map of all the things where we are most human. And 9 times out of 10, they're all the things that we spend our least amount of time during the week doing, because all of the churn of repetitive admin, whatever it may be, gets in the way. So what if we were able to bring tools in, not to replace these deeply human components, but to actually reduce some of the repetition, so we can spend more time being more human?
Yes. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to not lose ourselves. People talk about AI taking over, and there's some real concern. People have huge concerns about it. But we just need to keep coming back to, how do we keep that, to say, human in the loop? But like you said, what parts of a role, what parts of education, what do we need to see that is the human part? And how do we see that, rather than just looking at something that's being produced? Now, one of the things that we haven't really talked about yet, and I do want to have a quick look at some of the questions before we finish up in 5 minutes. But if someone was listening to this right now, so they're working in a manager role, they might be a school leader, a trainer, but what's one thing that you would tell someone that they need to go and do or learn or action to try and stay ahead of the curve?
I think pick one process, pick one thing that you currently do, well defined, that you do on a whatever cadence it may be. It's not really important. And think about, with the knowledge that you currently have, with the tools that you currently have available, how could you actually improve that process? And if you don't know how to improve that process, you could open up even a free version of Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, and ask it and say, how could I, in an AI-enabled world, make this process a bit easier, a bit more efficient? I do this all the time, and it's whenever I catch myself feeling overwhelmed or feeling like, God, I really don't want to do this task that I've got to do, or, oh, it's not that time. It's that time of the quarter again where I need to do this thing. I will actually sit down and think, how can I improve this process with the tools that are currently available, so this no longer it has this same negative connotation with that particular task. So yeah, I think pick something, and don't, one of the dream here is everyone starts talking about agentic, and we're going to redesign the whole organization, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. That's fine. That can come later. But for now, pick one task and just see how could you improve it by 10%, or give yourself another hour back in your week.
One of the things, like taking that and just like picking one thing, one of the things that I've recently, and I can't believe I wasn't doing it before, recently started doing, is scheduled prompts.
Yeah.
And so doing a weekly report of something, and that weekly report, I get to the end of the week, and some weeks I was going, I've got to keep some notes of what I'm going to put into this weekly report as it pops up to me. Then I got to a stage where I'm like, so I'm doing this every week, and I've got Copilot for that particular project. We're in Copilot, and Copilot's an enterprise version. It's got access to my emails. It's got access to documents. It's got access to meetings. So instead of me trying to think of everything and go back through, I've now got a scheduled prompt that runs at the same time every week. And it gives me my summary of the week that based on all of those things, that I then pull out of and I do my own weekly report. So it doesn't do my report for me because I still wanted to do that final version of it. But it just condenses everything for me into a list so that I don't have to go trying to think of all the different things. And it's scheduled, it pops up, it goes, your scheduled prompt is ready, off you go. So that would be, my one thing that I've recently done that's been really, really helpful.
I think with that, the caveat with all of these things is you have to be okay to invest the time to do it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are time gains that you can make in using any of these tools or processes or scheduling, whatever it may be. But you actually have to be okay with the fact it might take you 4 or 5 times as long the first time for you to then be able to build in that efficiency. So then when you do it the third, fourth, fifth time, that's when you start getting the time savings. Often we sit down stressed and time poor and then say, it's going to take too long. It's going to take too long to do it.
Do it myself.
I might as well do it myself. Yeah, exactly. And so it is an investment of time.
It is. And thinking of time, we've only got 2 minutes left. I just want to jump into a couple of these questions. Sally has said that she'd be interested in seeing what the prompt was to summarize my week. I actually got Copilot to help me write the prompt. I just explained to Copilot what it was that I wanted to achieve and the sorts of things I wanted to pull out. I gave it categories that I wanted to put things under, and Copilot helped me craft that prompt that we then scheduled. So get your AI tools to help you craft your prompts and refine it and then get it to give you a final version that you can use. I'm just going to run back up a little bit. We've had a few people say, love to hear any tips for supporting students with disability to either use AI or support learning. Have you got any tips there for our last little minute?
I think there's opportunities now because also we're moving away from typing. And so I think it's exploring, depending on the requirements of the learner, of exploring what the different kind of multimodal mediums there are now of being able to interact with the tools. So be it dictation, be it voice commands, be it video in some scenarios. So I think it would be about exploring those and thinking about it beyond a writing, physically typing an answer.
I've been getting more into the habit of clicking that little microphone and talking to and I know you have conversations when you're driving, don't you?
Yeah, every time I drop my daughter off at daycare in the morning, I'll switch something on. It's Claude Voice at the moment as it's improved. And I might even, before doing that trip, I'll load in a document or something, a report, and then it has that context, and then we'll sit for 20 minutes and chat while driving. So yeah, I use that a lot.
And that would be really, really useful for students with different disabilities, as well, depending on their disability. But being able to have a conversation about information rather than having to read a document.
I actually did that a few days ago. So I'm writing some of these research papers. Is again me reading them back. I will skip over what the errors are from just reading it. So I think it was Claude actually, to read I downloaded it from one, put it into the other, got it to read it out loud. And then I would go section by section, and then I'd give my feedback, and then we would rewrite and then repeat the process again. So it was like having somebody, sat with me reading it while I think about whether I agree with what's gone into a particular section.
That's awesome. I have not thought of doing that.
Yeah, it works really well. I was curious to know if it would, and it actually works really well.
That's fantastic. Well, we might finish on that note. We do have some other comments in there, which we'll have a skim over and see if there's anything to include in the notes for the session. But really, really valued the conversation with you today, Toby.
That's fun.
Always love talking to you about this stuff, and we do catch up and talk for an hour or more at a time on these topics, which was why it was great to actually record it this time, and appreciate the time that you've put into the session to be able to come on today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kerry, and thank you all very much for your questions and contributions. So thank you.
And yes, thank you all for joining us for episode 1 of the Skills Forecast. This will go up, as I mentioned, as a podcast episode. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you can get the future ones. Episode 2 is in August. I'll be talking with Andrew Shea for that session about the vet sector at a crossroads with lots of things happening at the moment. So make sure you go and register for that one as well. And if you can't attend live, it will be available afterwards. You will, if you are on live, the advantage of coming on live is not only being able to ask questions, but you will also receive a certificate of attendance to put into your PD as well. So once again, thank you. I'm Kerry Buttery. This has been the Skills Forecast episode 1. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month.